My name is Ann Hubble. I'm the program director here, and it's my pleasure to introduce the Women in the World Spotlight Supermajority. Before we get started, I just want to thank our sponsors. So thank you to our signature sponsors, AMC Networks and the Mayor's Office for Media and Entertainment. And thank you to the friends of the festival, Essentia, IFC Films Unlimited, PTEX, and Wheelhouse Creative. So I'd like to introduce our panelists that will come up after. We have Ajin Poo, Cecile Richards, Katherine Grainger, and our moderator, Tina Brown. But first, I'd like to bring up filmmaker Yoruba Richen to present a clip.
Oh, no, I'm not mic'd. Hi, thank you guys for coming out on this hot evening. But it's hot because there's lots of hot things happening here. My name is Yoruba Richen, and I'm part of an all women of color creative team of storytellers working on a film called And She Could Be Next. It's a documentary that will be released next year in the run-up to these very important 2020 elections. We, of course, were reminded once again this week how the focus of patriarchy and white supremacy threaten our democracy. In the hands of this administration, these outdated ideas have been emboldened, institutionalized, and weaponized, literally. But I'm here to tell you that better things are coming. 51 Fest reminds us that women are the majority in this country. But the country is also moving rapidly towards a non-white majority, or as we like to call it, a new American majority. As we saw in 2018 and again this week, women of color who live at the intersection of so many of these issues most pressing to Americans are claiming political power. And we did not come to play. And I have to just add, as I was following Stacey Abrams in Georgia and Lucy McBath in Georgia, what kept coming up is that when you elect Black women, when you elect women of color, we take care of everybody. We are not exclusive. This film, And She Could Be Next, asks whether democracy itself can be preserved and made stronger by those of us who are most marginalized. It was filmed throughout the 2018 election cycle and in the beginning of 2019. And She Could Be Next follows a dynamic slate of history-making candidates as they move from elections to governance. These candidates include Stacey Abrams, Rashida Tlaib, Lucy McBath, Veronica Escobar, and Deb Haaland. Names and faces that we've come to know since the 2018 midterms. And we also follow, and this is what makes our film unique from other films that just follow candidates. We also follow the tireless community organizers of color, working to reinvent ideas of voter engagement, registering people on the streets of Georgia and around the country to vote. They are writing a new playbook for representative democracy, where the target of their efforts shift from a focus on reliable voters onto large segments of Black, brown, and immigrant communities who are not even registered to vote. One of the most striking aspects of this film is that every frame is filled with people of color of all kinds, mostly women, who are not waiting to be saved, but are actually doing the necessary work to preserve our democracy. Images that we don't see on the nightly news with these pundits who spew their ridiculousness. Sorry, I just have to say that. The documentary field also struggles with this issue of diversity. We struggle with equity and we struggle with inclusion. And for far too long, these narratives have been predominantly filtered through the white and mostly male lens. Representation matters at every level of this project. Our team of directors and producers are all women of color. We include queer women and immigrants, Black, Latina, Muslim, and Native women. And She Could Be Next is inexorably tied to our own identities of gender, race, and politics. We too, who make this film, are the new American majority. And She Can Be Next bears witness to the birth of an intersectional movement of people of color, immigrants, youth, and progressives doing the most American thing possible, participating in this contact sport of true democracy. As America looks forward to yet another high-stakes election, one in which Black, Latinx, and Asian voters, and young voters as well, are prime constituencies, this film, And She Can Be Next, is a prescient glimpse inside the movement and the incredible women of color who are leading the way. Thank you.
For women of color, and particularly Black women, we are expected to stand quietly behind others, but we are never expected to be the ones in front. But there is now a critical mass of us. We refuse not to be the names on the ballot.
We have to take care of every Georgian, not just the ones we like and not just the ones who look like us. We have to be responsible for everyone, and that is why I'm running to become the next governor of the great state of Georgia.
From Michigan, for the first time, Democrats will have an all-female statewide ticket. And on that list, Rashida Tlaib. She is poised to become the first Muslim woman in Congress in the country.
This is a very unique time in our country. I think we're going to look at this back later in 10 years or 15 years, and people are going to wonder, what were you doing when he was our president? What, in this particular moment, were we all doing?
Rashida Tlaib at a speech held in Detroit by presidential candidate Donald Trump.
Thank you very much.
Electing me is going to inspire Laura, inspire Natasha, inspire Isra, everybody to run. And I want you all to believe in that bigger picture and believe in that movement.
Rashida was on the forefront, and she was not afraid to take on the Koch brothers.
Wait, I want to search the Koch brothers on Google.
Oh, here we go.
She's one of us. She grew up in Southwest Detroit, went to Southwestern High School. She comes from the same area as I do, fights for the same thing I do, and is not scared.
How old are you?
I'm 17.
If we don't elect someone who cares about the border, we're going to continue to get kids in cages where we see walls built in our communities.
Are you Eduardo Aguilera? I actually am running for Congress in El Paso.
Oh, really?
So I'm working to replace Beto, who was our congressman, as he goes off to the Senate. And I would be the first Latina
That would be awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
There's someone here in this room that will do just as good, more likely a better job than I've been able to do in the same position, only they will bring their unique perspective.
Never before have our communities been under such attack as they are with this administration. They have tried to dehumanize us.
Any volunteers for Stacey Abrams? Y'all looking good today.
Georgia is, I think, ground zero for building the new American majority coalition to win elections. And for those who are in the new American majority, it's progressive and moderate white voters. It is communities of color. It's low-income communities of every race. And the idea is that those communities have a shared value system, a progressive value system.
We are bringing together a coalition across the state of Georgia that is going to turn the state of Georgia and the nation blue again.
You ready to shock the world? My election is going to prove to the world, to the country, that we belong here.
6 years ago, I was just a working mom, doing my best to raise my son and take care of my family, and working as a flight attendant for Delta Airlines. Then all of a sudden, the lives of my family members changed in just an instant. We lost my son Jordan to a senseless act of gun violence. It's the hardest thing that I ever had to face. But my family, we persevered, and I decided to turn my grief into action. It is our time. It is our time. Do not be afraid. Stand up for what you know is right. Stand up for what you believe in. No matter what it looks like to you on the outside, we are victorious and we will win because we are on the right side.
Basically, I was just saying that was a great movie. And that we want to see the rest of it. Okay. I'm now celebrating these three incredible women on the stage who are the founders of Supermajority, a new organization which aims to motivate, catalyze, and organize women for the 2020 election. We have Cecile Riches on my right, Aijan Poo, and Katherine Grainger. Sorry, the other way around. These are three formidable women you'd want on your side, whether you are outnumbered or not. Cecile Riches, of course, was the mighty president of Planned Parenthood for 12 years. Yeah. Katherine Grainger is a partner at the public affairs firm Civitas and led the campaign to legalize same-sex marriage when she was assistant counsel. And Aijan Poo founded the National Domestic Workers Alliance, which won the nation's first basic protections for domestic workers. Three heroes on one little narrow stage on a steamy Friday afternoon. Where did you get the idea for Supermajority, in the first place? Was it just a realization that women's political power was a sleeping giant? I mean, was it your idea? Whose idea was it?
Thank you, Tina, and thanks for doing this. I mean, this is actually something that came out of, I think, all of our experience, particularly after the last election when, of course, the women's marches across the country where 4.5 million people, the largest marches in the history, recorded history of the United States, marched for women's rights. And then after that, I felt like we couldn't go to a town without finding a new women's group that had popped up. And I was actually traveling around the country at that point on behalf of Planned Parenthood, and everywhere I went, there was like, the badass babes in Bay City and the red wine and blue in Cincinnati, and all of these women who just began to feel like they had to do something more. I started talking to Aijen, our friend Alicia Garza, who's not here tonight, but who's a critical part of the of the founding of this organization, and Katherine, and saying, what if we actually pulled all of these women together that are doing this work? We could build the biggest, most powerful movement for women and women's rights, and I think actually, frankly, change the electorate forever in the United States of America. And no better time to do it. Fortunately, everybody was game, and so here we are. We're on the road.
Thank you. Well, it's kind of amazing that this extraordinary, force of women who have always been, who've been the majority of the voters, haven't had this kind of political power about their own issues. Yeah. Katherine, what do you ascribe that to?
So, women have not voted as a constituency before. Yeah. We've largely, even though we're the majority of the voters, and we vote significantly more and more reliably than men, we haven't been voting as women. So we actually haven't mobilized or used our power. And I think that what we saw and what we're seeing is that's changing. It's largely changing, and let me just say this, is that women of color, and your movie illustrates this so well, have been voting at the forefront and driving change in this country since the beginning. Right. White women have not in the same way. White women have been voting Republican since the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The reason being, they were voting to protect their race, not thinking about their gender identity. And we're starting to see that really shift with the election of Trump, because for the first time, these women who thought that basically systems were in place to protect them are like, oh, holy shit, no, there's not, right? Donald Trump is now president. And so we, even in the 2018 midterms, started to see a real shift where white women were joining women of color to start voting and mobilizing as women. And once we crack that code, once we build a multiracial constituency of women, we can change progressive politics in this country for the rest of our lives. Yeah. And that's what we're trying to do.
Aishan, Senator Kamala Harris this week announced that she's sponsoring a new federal domestic workers' Bill of Rights, which you worked on, of course, for many, many years, and you published that terrific op-ed about it in the New York Times just recently. What are you finding that the domestic workers in your coalition tell you are the issues they care the most about?
Well, domestic workers have been organizing for a long time. In fact, our foremother of our movement is a woman named Dorothy Bolden, who's from Atlanta, Georgia, who founded an organization called the National Domestic Workers Union in 1968 that organized African American domestic workers throughout the South. And they were successful in gaining inclusion in minimum wage protections for domestic workers in the 70s. After being excluded for decades since the New Deal. And it's interesting because even at the beginning of that movement, the requirements that Dorothy Bolden had to join the National Domestic Workers Union were, one, that you had to be a domestic worker and want to connect and organize with other women, and two, that you had to be registered to vote. And so democracy has always been a concern. Having a voice and being a part of shaping the future of this country and for our kids and our grandkids has always been a concern of women and of my workforce. Some of the other issues that we care about are obviously wages. This is a workforce that the average annual income of a home care worker, for example, is $15,000 per year. Can you imagine trying to pay the rent in New York City with $15,000 per year? Childcare, the average cost of childcare is at least $10,000 per year. And when, most people earn, 70% of our workforce makes less than $50,000 per year, and 2/3 of all minimum wage workers are women. How are people paying for childcare? How are people paying for elder care on top of rent and food and all the other transportation? So bread and butter issues are at the heart of what our members are organizing around, but they don't see it as siloed. This whole concept of intersectionality that Yoruba mentioned before is really about looking at how all of the different dimensions of power are shaping our lives and how women organizing together can unlock all kinds of power to win on all of the issues that we care about.
I'm so interested in what has made each one of you such passionate and effective activists over the years. I mean, a lot of people think of themselves as people who are committed to causes and who care, but they sort of falter at the fence. I mean, they don't get out there and really become not just people who tweet or get onto social media in all forms, but actually are effective, who get results. Can each of you just tell me sort of briefly, really, what made you so effective as activists, do you think, and what took you into this field?
Well, I mean, I was actually fortunate. I grew up in Texas, to a family. Yeah, Texas, all right. We're going to bring it back at some point. But it's, I grew up in a family that was in the civil rights movement, the social justice movement. The dinner table wasn't where you ate, it was where you sorted precinct lists. And my parents were against everything that was happening in Texas. And so I think I just grew up in a family where the lessons were, if you have the choice of what you do for a living, and as Ijen and I talk about, there's a lot of the women in this country who don't have the choice of what they get to do for a living. In fact, they're doing everything they can just to support their family. If you have that option, to be able to do work that makes a difference in the lives of people is the highest calling. It's the greatest honor, and I feel like we all feel incredibly privileged to be able to do this work and to be able to do it at a time when I think millions of people in this country are looking around and saying, what can I do? And to me, that's kind of the interesting organizing challenge of our time. I know some of my friends from the labor movement are here, and back when I started in the labor movement, you were always trying to convince people that it was important to organize. I feel like now everything has flipped on its head. And in fact, the biggest challenge today is to deal with the tsunami of women who are coming into Supermajority, into all these organizations and raising their hand and saying, I've never organized in my life, I've never knocked on a door, I don't know what this is all about, but I've got to do something more. And that to me this is an exciting moment. It's a huge challenge, but I do believe women are going to decide the next presidential election. And so we better get busy, because I think it's on us, it's on women of color who have led this forever, and it's on white women to finally not keep relying on women of color to save us from ourselves, but to do our part as well. And that's why this, to me, is so exciting.
Similarly, I grew up in a family that valued politics quite a lot. And the story that I tell is when I was 10 years old, my mother was a delegate for Jesse Jackson in Colorado. And she took me with her to we made it all the way to the state convention. And she took me into that room. And 10-year-old me, my whole life changed. Like, there were people there, and what I didn't know I was witnessing was democracy in action and collective power. What I felt was, this is the excitement that I want to be a part of my entire life. And it changed me. From that moment on, I became politically active, watching every debate, canvassing with my parents, being involved in it. And the path that I chose was really to go on the inside, becoming a lawyer, working in government, because I thought if we could learn those master's tools, we could figure out how to really change systems. And that worked for me for a long time. And now we're in a Trump America where none of the rules apply. And it's more important than ever that we turn all of that on its head, but still, I think, stay very true to what democracy can actually do and what we can achieve through it. But one more piece is that I've been telling the Jesse Jackson story for a long time, because that was my political consciousness. My mother recently heard it on a Supermajority talk. And she said to me, well, you left out the best part of the story. And I was like, what is that? And she said that we were sitting in a room and they needed a delegate for Jesse Jackson, and no one raised their hand. Now, as you would imagine, I grew up in Littleton, Colorado. There were not a lot of black people there. And my mother and I were the only black people in the room. And apparently I looked at her and I said, well, Mama, if you don't do it, who will? And that's what made her raise her hand.
Beautiful.
And I think we think of Supermajority, right, and all of the women that we've talked to kind of going around the country, everyone's terrified. But they don't know how to mobilize the system. But it's those moments of courage, right, is how women are actually showing up. And my mother saying yes to that was what changed the trajectory of my life.
Beautiful.
Well, when I was in college, I was a part of a multiracial student coalition to establish ethnic studies on campus at Columbia. And it was the first time I saw groups of students organizing together. It was the Black Student Union, the Latino Students Union, and the Asian American students all came together and decided to join together to establish a department for ethnic studies, because we all wanted to study more about the histories of our communities in this country, and there was really very little available. And so we had a campaign throughout the spring of my senior year in 1996. And we took over buildings and we did sit-ins, and there was a hunger strike where students went on hunger strike for 14 days, and we won. And now, as a result of that campaign, students can major and minor in ethnic studies, and there is now an official center for the study of ethnicity and race at Columbia. And so generations of students after can now have a different grounding in our history, our story, as part of the story of this country. And I just loved the idea that you could organize together, especially across race, and win things. You could actually win and change the course of choices for people in the future, for generations to come. And I think I caught the winning bug, and so I never stopped organizing after that.
Cecile, abortion obviously is going to be and is a hugely hot button issue in this election. Your successor as the head of Planned Parenthood, Dr. Liana Wen, was just ousted after less than a year. It seems that one of the issues which she said that abortion care should be a health issue, not a political one. What do you think the best way forward is? Because Planned Parenthood is such a power base for this election. Which direction should you think they should be going in now?
So, I mean, abortion is a huge issue and will be, and I think actually I just looking at polling, we just finished some polling at Supermajority. It is a highly motivating issue for people who are concerned about the future of abortion rights. And so I actually think in an interesting way, because of the attacks by this administration on ending access to safe and legal abortion, it's no longer even a pretense that it's about protecting women's health or any of that. It's actually, they just want to make it illegal. That has penetrated into the minds of not only women, but men in this country who share those views. So I think it's going to be a hugely important issue. I do think that, I mean, I don't disagree with Dr. Wen. I don't think healthcare should be a political issue in this country either, but it is. As we saw, this administration just eliminated family planning funding for Planned Parenthood all across the country, not because of healthcare, not because of any other issue, but sheerly because of politics. And so if we're gonna actually keep access to safe and legal abortion, to birth control, to transgender health care, to all the things that Planned Parenthood fights for, we got to be in the political arena. And I can guarantee you, Alexis McGill-Johnson, who just came in as the interim president of Planned Parenthood, she's going to do just that. So I feel totally confident that Planned Parenthood will be on the field, and they need to be, as a healthcare provider, but also as a movement that protects abortion rights and more.
Of course, it's also going to motivate the other side. No, I mean, the pro-life lobby right now is just as fired up. So this is.
I just don't think that's. I mean, I'll only disagree with you in that they've always been fired up, but they feel like they now have their folks in power. They feel like they've won the Supreme Court battle. They've now, as we know, Judge Kavanaugh is now in the court. And so I mean, at least all the research I'm seeing now, and we're in the field constantly hearing where women are feeling, women now know that the idea of Roe being overturned, the idea of abortion becoming illegal in this country again, is no longer a theoretical question. It is reality. And in many states, as we know, it is a practical reality already. It may be illegal on the books, but I think this is going to be an election where, again, women were 54% of the electorate last November, as we saw. Record numbers of women, people of color elected to Congress, finally beginning to get some parity. Women, again, are going to be the overwhelming majority, the supermajority, if you will, of voters. And this is going to be one of the issues that is going to drive them to the polls. And they are going to vote against people, not only the President of the United States, but members of Congress, the United States Senate, who are trying to roll back women's rights in America.
Katherine, the extraordinary work you did on same-sex marriage, I'm fascinated to know what lessons you can now bring to other kinds of activism, such as this cause of supermajority. Can you share with us some of the things that were the most effective in succeeding with that groundbreaking legislation?
So this is something that I think about quite a lot. And we can go through the whole kind of campaign strategy around marriage. There was one, and it was quite robust. But in terms of the takeaways, I would say that there are a few things. One is really having a North Star of which you're organizing around. What is it, and Ijan, you do this all the time when you win, what is it that you're trying to achieve, and then how are you building a very coordinated and aligned strategy at scale in order to do that? So that's just the given. But I think that the thing, we had all of that in marriage, and we were talking about it as the 1,324 rights that gay people don't have because, that straight people have because we couldn't get married. And so then we started doing focus groups, and we had asked straight people, well, why do gay people want to get married? And they'd say, oh, there are all these rights that they don't have. And then we would say to them, well, why did you get married? And they said, well, because I love my partner, I wanted to take care of them. And we realized, we had this aha moment that we weren't leading a values-based campaign. And that's a huge lesson.
Because it was really about love.
And once we changed it to love is love, everything shifted. because we started to get people to be able to empathize with what we were actually talking about. And suddenly, straight people who didn't have any skin in the game were like, oh, I can see that, right? That makes sense to me. And that really shifted the entire narrative. The other thing, and this is a piece that I am really kind of obsessed with, is one of the first things that we had to do was convince us, gay people, that we deserve to get married. Whether you believed in it or not, that's a feminist debate. But if we actually had so much internal stigma around whether or not we deserved that right. And once we started to win, and once people started to see what happened, that they were being accepted and being able to love freely and out loud, our minds started to shift. And you started to, politically, what happened in the gay community in terms of we saw what happened if we started to mobilize and use our political power. And that stigma piece is where I think women are stuck right now. We do not understand, or we are not taking advantage of the power that we actually have as the main electorate in this country. And we're stuck in this stigma where we don't say that abortion is health care, right? And until we start to win and win campaigns and see what it means to actually move forward and build something that includes all of us, we're gonna stay in this place. And the gays are not there anymore. You see it. Like, it's this crazy thing of like, when gun control happened, they're like, go get the gays, they know how to win, right? And so it is this thing, I call it cognitive liberation, where suddenly our minds are free in a different way, where we realize that if we want to make change, we can do it, and if we don't participate, the change won't happen. And that I think is the biggest takeaway from marriage.
So interesting, because what you're really saying is that years and years and years of being kind of repressed, you're beaten down. Literally, you feel beaten down.
Oh, absolutely.
And so you don't really think you have the right to move forward.
And it's so internalized, you don't even realize
right.
it.
Right. It's so internalized. Nobody must feel that more really than domestic workers. And you've got, I would imagine, I mean, a huge amount of immigrants as well. Mm-hmm. And I would think quite a few undocumented women, right, in your community. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think both things are true, where the workforce really does understand the inherent dignity of the work, right? People really take pride in the work that they do. The domestic workers and the caregivers that I know love to take care of other people. They love to nurture the human potential of a child and see that blossom. They love to know that they're providing support for the dignity of an older person, somebody who cared for lots of other people throughout their lives. And they know that that work is important. And also, they live in a society which really devalues that work and doesn't recognize or protect it. And so both things are true. I think they've internalized the devaluing of it, and they also know the inherent value of it. And that's where there's room to organize, and that's why we're organizing and fighting for a Bill of Rights.
How are you reaching them to organize? Because the other problem that women have is that they have no time. You know, if you're trying to play multi-roles and it's just you, and there's so many single mothers and have no childcare, et cetera, there isn't really any room for being, politically organized.
Well, what's interesting is that I started out organizing lots of different constituencies of women, and we would organize these health fairs and other kinds of Know Your Rights education sessions, and it was always the domestic workers who would come every single time, and they inherently knew the power of coming together and being a part of a collective because of the amount of isolation that you face, right, as a domestic worker. You're alone in a workplace. There are no other coworkers to go to for support or advice, right? So the power of organizing and the collective is so clear. And I think that that's the moment we're in for all women right now, is that we're all wanting to break out of the isolation of the experience of not having power in this country, right? And wanting to connect, and not just connecting with people who look like us or who are like us or who are in our communities, but connecting with all kinds of women and really wanting to understand what is the potential of our power together, right? I think in past moments there has been a question of, yes, women are doing too much, working too hard for too little. And at the same time, there's this incredible appetite that Cecile referred to, where we are just like literally inundated with women who are full-time, working, taking care of their families, active in their churches, and wanting to do more with Supermajority, right? Both are true. I
love that point actually about breaking out of the isolation, because that is something that is very, very profoundly sort of disempowering in a way to be isolated. Cecile, what is the polling telling you that you're doing? I'm fascinated to know what you're learning. What is the number one issue that women really care? What are the top 5 things? I mean, is there anything surprising in what you're being told in this polling?
I wouldn't say there's anything, shocking, although I do feel like in economic terms, there are so many issues, and many which Jen raised and Katherine raised, where women may say, okay, there's a booming economy, but why is it that I still can't find affordable childcare? Or why am I still taking care of my parents and I have no paid family leave? Or how is it that after all these years of talking about equal pay, we're still, women are making 80 cents on the dollar, but of course, if you're a woman of color, it's much, much worse and not getting any better. Thank God for the United States women's, national team, where equal pay is now on the national agenda and on the global agenda, because people understanding what a profound problem is. So I think none of the issues are surprising me. I do think the 2 things that are really coming through that we see so much is women do feel isolated, not only because of perhaps their workforce, but because they're living in a country where things are happening that they can't believe are happening and that they don't agree with. And so everything we do, whether it's a local convening, whether it's allowing people to just call in from around the country, women everywhere are calling in just because they actually want to feel that they're part of something. And we actually did an interesting survey. The first thing when women signed up to be part of Supermajority, in the first 3 days we had 100,000 people just sign up. And we asked them, what's your superpower? And the number 1 response was empathy, which I think is an interesting reflection on not only where women are at, but also this lack of empathy and the lack of just basic humanity and how we treat each other. And I do think that is going to be a powerful motivator, not only for activism, but for what, again, a lot of these women have been involved in resisting, whether it's around getting teacher pay, whether it's around the defunding of Planned Parenthood, whether it's family separation. But women are also saying, like, okay, we are leading the resistance, but we want to do more than resist. We actually want to imagine the world we want to live in and go build that. Yeah. And that to me is really deeply connected to Katherine's. Katherine said one time to me, which I thought was so right, she said, women still don't believe we deserve the good things. And I think that is a large part of what is happening together.
I think that's absolutely right. Katherine, how are we going to sort of bridge the divide, in this racial question, though? I mean, with the Women's March, very sort of sadly seem to, that those founders and those organizers seem to kind of fall out over all of these questions of intersectionality and so on. I mean, do you think we've got beyond that place now, and that we are going to be able to have? You're looking skeptical already.
No, I'm just. I mean, got beyond the place of racism in the United States?
No, got beyond the place where women are. Do you think you can bring black and white women together around the issue, as you say, of organizing as women as opposed to organizing, for their different?
I do, and I think we need to think about it a little differently, which is historically it's been white women, and then how do women of color join what white women are building? And as Yoruba's film showed, we are in a place now where the leadership really is coming from. It always has, women of color, but now in a much more public, profound way. And we don't need all white women to win. We need we need basically 20% of them.
Yeah.
Right?
And why do you think that black women, who have been really the leaders of the backbone of the Democratic Party for so long, have just not really been given their place sort of in the leadership? Because, as we see, women of color were the people who came out for Hillary Clinton, and the white women didn't. which was a bitter thing to see. How do you explain that?
Well, a few ways.
Yeah.
One is, I'll go back to the point about racism in America. But two, I think that people are really, the Democratic Party, I was thinking about this on the plane coming here, the Democratic Party has never organized women as a constituency, even though we're the majority of voters. I'm just going to keep saying that over and over again.
Right.
It has never been a strategy of theirs, which is insane. And then you put on top of that they've never organized black women as a constituency, even though they're the most reliable voters for the Democratic Party ever. 94% of black women voted for Hillary Clinton. And so they've never done it. But on top of that, I think that the thing that is even worse is that even though black women are the most reliable voters, the Democratic Party has never had a platform that included anything that they needed. So we've never, as a Democratic Party, even tried to make black women's lives better. And so what we are seeing is people like Stacey Abrams are like, that's it, we're just going to do it ourselves. And the story that's so powerful about Stacey is that she wasn't endorsed by the party. She was not the person that they were putting up. She chose to and built that coalition on her own. And that is the future, and that's how we're going to get out of this mess.
Can I just...
Hi, Sharon. Yeah.
I also just want to say that I think it's also fairly obvious that we're living in the midst of a black women-led cultural renaissance in America, where everything from the women, including Alicia Garza, who founded Black Lives Matter, revolutionizing how we think about storytelling and narrative in the movement context, to women like Ava DuVernay and Beyonce, and really transforming our culture and democratizing the story of who we are and who we can become as a country. And that is benefiting all of us in a way that I think we can all connect to on a deeply emotional level. And that is power, actually.
What are your thoughts about the Democratic Party right now and what we're seeing on stage and so on in the debates? Cecile, is it of concern to you that all of the candidates said that they would abolish private health care?
No, I'm not. I mean, I guess I've not been focused on that. I've been focused on the fact that before the debates even started, the entire narrative in this country was women can't be elected president. And it took one debate and Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren getting on that stage, and now they're in the top 5. And so I just feel like that is what's happening. And yet, of course, the backlash is, I do believe, still. There are, as we're seeing, as was played out this week, when women of color actually assert their ability to actually be on that stage and actually to be considered, it causes a lot of folks discomfort, perhaps including some of the folks who are running for president. And I just think this is the time, particularly for white women, that we need to stand with the women of color who have challenged the party, who have challenged their incumbents, who have actually gone out there and are now leading. And I think that I love Yoruba. I'm so glad you had Lucy McBath, because I think she's a classic example of someone who was never picked. Lauren Underwood, never picked, right? Ayanna Pressley, never picked. But these women actually ran for office not to be called congresswomen. They ran for office to change the system and to do something important. And that, to me, is what we're seeing. That's why they're shaking things up, is because they actually want things to change. I just think this is, and I think one thing we have to say about Stacey Abrams, because she ran an incredible race. She is an extraordinary leader. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important, because one of the things we all have to get right, too, is democracy reform. Because if every person in Georgia had been allowed to vote and every vote had been counted, Stacey would be the governor of Georgia today.
That's absolutely right. Katherine, as a very innovative lawyer, I mean, what are your thoughts about this voter suppression that Stacey went through? And are we going to see more of it in the next election?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be the thing listen, we have the numbers. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. Let's just not forget that, right? And so what our opposition has figured out is that they have to cheat to win. And they pull the levers of power, and so they're able to do that with voter suppression, voter intimidation, not kicking people off the rolls. I think that we're going to see that more than ever. And I think that what's interesting about it is normally that's been directed towards people of color. I think it's going to be directed against women as well, because Karl Rove has said that there's nothing more terrifying than when women come together and start voting as a constituency, right? So he sees it. And I think that, to Cecile's point, I believe this, and what Stacey lifted up, is democracy reform is a core feminist issue. Mm-hmm. And until we figure out how to make sure that every voice is heard, and quite frankly, we can talk about the Electoral College as well, we are not going to get to a place where the majority of this country actually is determining the elections. And so I would say to all of you, whether you're lawyers or not, and want to get more involved, voter protection is the most important thing, in addition to door knocking and giving money and turning out, that I think we can do leading up to 2020.
Mm. Well, before we go to questions, I would love to ask each of you, starting with you, Aijan, is there any particular stories that you think of as, in your head when you're kind of flagging? I mean, women who you represent, and, you keep their stories as a way to re-energize yourself when you're feeling that this work is, as it is extremely at times frustrating and grueling.
Well, I think about a woman here in New York who's an organizer. She was a nanny for many years and also survived sexual assault as a nanny. And she joined the organization and is now an organizer and has supported dozens of other survivors to come forward and tell their story, and was just lobbying on the Hill, meeting with people like Lucy Macbeth, for a domestic worker bill of rights at the federal level that would provide protections from sexual harassment for all domestic workers for the very first time, because those don't exist. And so being able to turn your pain into power and real change that benefits and supports women, your daughters and your granddaughters, that story, that loop, is experienced by our members all the time. It's the reason why I'm in this work. It's the potential of Supermajority to transform what's possible for all women in this country. That's what drives me.
That's wonderful. From pain to power. I think that's just an amazing sort of slogan. Katherine, what about you?
I'll just say I'm just motivated by women, period. Like, I just love us. I do. Like, the way we show up, the way we're in community, the way we try to yield power differently. And I had a moment in your movie with that 17-year-old, right?
Yes, I love her
who
too.
said that she's one of us, and the excitement and the possibility there, that happens every day. Yeah. And that's what gets me to show up, and that's why I do the work. Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, probably Great Lakes, maybe so, because, same. I feel like every day there's a story of women and why this work is so rewarding, and us being on the road together has been just so amazing. But I remember, I guess actually last summer, I was speaking at NYU because I was on book tour, and I got the question, which I get everywhere I go. Someone had written in on a card saying, I have a good job, but I don't know. I feel like we're headed into this midterm election, and I don't really know what to do. And I said, well, I don't know who that is that asked that question, but if I were you, I would quit my job and I would go work for Stacey Abrams down in Atlanta, Georgia, because she's the most important and exciting candidate running. And so and then we go on, and I get on the plane about a week later, and I get a message through Instagram. And it's a young woman who said, I was sitting in the audience the other night at NYU, and I heard what you said, so I went home, I quit my job, I'm flying to Atlanta to become Stacey Abrams' deputy digital director. And it was like, and so I think it's just an important thing to remember that there are so many people in this country who are really just waiting waiting for instructions, although that's my message is don't wait for instructions, just do the next thing. But I do think this is this incredible moment where women are, they are taking joy in the success of other women and just trying to find ways to do more together. So.
Yeah. That is so inspiring in itself. I hope everyone here is listening and ready to get on the next plane to whatever it is that Supermajority needs. Let's go to question time. Do we have any questions? Thank you from the back in orange.
Hi.
Who's got the mic? Is anyone going to take?
I'm really loud.
No, we'll take a mic up to you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica. Thank you so much for doing all that you do. I'm exhausted just listening. So here's my thing. On Twitter, all over the place, is a wonderful woman named Jennifer Cohn, C-O-H-N, and she has been screaming at the top of her lungs on Twitter about ES and S. They make the voter machines. And it is absolutely rife with corruption, more specifically in Georgia and Nevada. And I'm just here, I guess, to scream on behalf of Jenny Cohn and to you who have power and much more of a voice certainly than I do, because I have to say we can get everybody in this room in the world to vote, but if they are able to change the votes, and they are, and the software allows it to be changed from like off base, if you will. So I just wanted to scream on Jenny's behalf and say, please, you who are in power, if you somehow can look into it, or I don't know, but it's not going to matter if the votes can be changed. It's not going to matter at all. So that's it. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing to that, though? And there are amazing, I think this is a critical problem. There are robust organizations working on these issues. I think there's also, though, I worry that I don't want people to give up and not actually participate, because we have, despite a rigged system, we elected Barack Obama twice, and we've done other historic things. And so I think it is important to raise these issues, and I think there are organizations, again, that are on the forefront of that, but I hope that doesn't discourage anyone from doing what we can and what we have to do to turn out every single voter this next election.
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for this evening. I have two questions, one very quick and easy, and then one maybe not as much. One, the easy one, will Supermajority be endorsing specific candidates, or will it merely be platform and policy that you'll back? And if you do, how will those decisions be made? And then the second one is, it seems, especially coming off of what you've said about women of color and how they've led the way, it's always fascinated me the way the religious right has such a stronghold on issues that don't seem to be moral, and their fight against healthcare, which is abortion rights, but up until now we've called it healthcare to be nice, and so many things, and backing Donald Trump. They're one of his biggest backers, the evangelicals and the religious right. Women of color have a very strong, generally, are very faith-based, and the idea that they could lead the way and almost lead white women out of this stronghold, to me, seems fascinating. I don't know if that's doable from an activation.
In there, so
right.
Anybody want to take a piece of it?
Well, I'll just say on the endorsement, we actually have the ability to endorse. We won't do that in the primary, but we are actually launching September 15th in Atlanta, Georgia, a 15-state sort of tour, bus tour, to actually, and inviting the presidential candidates to hear from women as opposed to talk to women. We're trying to invert the idea of these candidate forums and say, actually, what if candidates had to hear from women instead? And I think that's going to be really critical, that actually that we engage women in being able to tell their stories and feel like they have a connection in this election. And then we are in the process of, and you can join Supermajority, it's free, and weigh in on a values-based agenda, which will be launched as part of that tour, so that we can actually evaluate where candidates are on the issues and values that women have in this country.
I guess that one way of answering the other part of the question, Catherine, is just what kind of inroads can you make sort of in red states, or are you not really trying?
Well, I can just really quickly say that I think that there's signs that there's so much potential and appetite for organizing in every state, including red states. And one data point that a lot of people don't know about that I think is incredibly inspiring and important is that single white women in rural districts flipped 17 points from Republican to Democrat in the 2018 election.
Wow.
17 points. That's huge. Yeah. And we're talking about launching an organizing program as Supermajority that's hopefully going to be in all 50 states, and we're going to train 2 million women to engage and organize in their communities all over the country, and hopefully put together the largest woman-to-woman volunteer canvas in the history of this country. And we hope to be able to reach into every state.
Last question. Over here.
Thank you to you guys. I'm really excited about Supermajority because I know so many women that are chomping at the bit, just waiting to sign on. And I also just wanted to point out the importance of Amy McGrath's campaign, because
Yes.
if we don't get up behind her 1,000% and take
She's in
control of the
Kentucky,
Senate,
right?
take control of the Senate, then it doesn't matter who the president's going to be. So that's I'm hoping that you guys are going to be getting behind her as well.
Yeah, and actually many of the states that we're training women in right now are states where there are key Senate races, and that's one of them. And you're right. I mean, this is long haul work. I mean, I guess I'll close. Maybe this is a depressing point to close on, but it's not like things were great for women before Donald Trump. He is in many ways a symptom of a much bigger problem, and I hope our aspirations as women, as activists, as voters, as donors, is much beyond simply changing who's in the White House. We need to change how politics is done in this country. So
Thank you. Thank you so much. Powerhouse, Supermajority. I'd love just to tell everybody in the audience, how do they get involved with Supermajority?
You can just sign up at supermajority.com and weigh in on the agenda. We're going to get 50,000 folks to actually participate in this process. It'll be live August 1st. But sign up and we'll send it to you.
Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for coming, and spread the word about Supermajority. It is clearly going to be the face of the future.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you.